In the 1970s, the sport of rallying had changed from gentle road-going competition to high-speed action. It was faster, more glamorous and much more specialised than ever before. The start of an exciting age for a very exciting sport. In the 1950s, cars, even those in works teams, were nearly standard, and the drivers were all amateurs. Most events used public roads, and an amazing variety of cars could be competitive. Because famous rallies like the Monte Carlo used very few speed tests, and there was often a bit of circuit racing to sort out a result, you could go rallying in an Aston Martin, a Ford Zephyr, a Mark 7 Jaguar or a Sunbeam Tiger and still hope for success. For those who won, the prestige was enormous, but it was all done with very little backup. Service cars were few and far between, special tyres had yet to be perfected, and many competitors carried their own luggage and spare parts for thousands of miles. Then came the big advances of the 60s, when the first homologation specials from Ford and BMC pushed up the pace considerably. In only 2 or 3 years, the once gentle sport of rallying had become high speed and big business. Early in the 1970s, 2 rear-engined rally cars, the Porsche 911 and the Alpine Renault, dominated top-class events. Most of the classic tarmac rallies of the 1960s had gone, displaced by special stage events using low-grip tracks. Lots of power, good traction and light weight were all needed on stages which used loose surfaces, ploughed through mud or skated across the snow and ice of World Championship events. Even though its front-engine rear-drive layout was not ideal for the new breed of events, Ford's Escort RS 1600 was still a winner all over the world. It was only at the start of a long and successful career which would completely span the exciting 70s. Quite suddenly, the glamour of rallying had attracted more works teams to the sport. Facing up to Porsche, Alpine Renault and Ford were Lancia, with its nimble front-wheel drive Fulvia HFs, and Saab, whose front-drive V4 saloons made up for a lack of power by being strong and bravely driven. There were 2 new teams. Fiat got started by using front-engined 124 Sport Spiders. They soon evolved a special in the 124 Abarth Spider that had bigger and more ambitious ideas for the future. Datsun of Japan also set up a European team. Their attractive, heavy but brutally fast 240Z coupes were real crowd pleasers for they had a character which reminded so many people of the great days of the Austin Healey 3000s. Three famous cars had already disappeared. The great days of the Mini Cooper S, which won 3 Monte Carlo rallies, were over. BMC's famous saloons, which handled so well and were so astonishingly fast, had run out of development potential. The magnificent Austin Healey 3000, so exciting to watch on fast stages, whether on tarmac or on the loose, was now no more than a memory. Mid-1960s regulation changes had wiped it out. Although Saab was still a serious competitor, the famous sight of Erik Karlsson in a high-revving two-stroke model was now just a memory. These were the drivers who were already famous. Hannu Mikkola from Finland driving for Ford, his countryman Rauno Aaltonen taming the Datsun 240Z, while Timo Mäkinen was also driving a Ford. Stig Blomqvist from Sweden was faithful to Saab, while Britain's Roger Clark was successful with the Escort. Events varied in style and format. The Monte Carlo rally had, however, taken on its familiar form, a combination of ice-covered mountain passes and twisty tarmac stages. Yet the spark and professionalism were still missing. Timo Mäkinen and Henry Lidden's Escort RS 1600 sets out with high hopes, but on the snow and ice of southern France, Jean-Claude Androuet's Alpine Renault found a lot more grip. Compared with the 1990s, there didn't seem to be many spectators, but GM drivers such as Nasinius and Kulang were more interested in taming their automatic transmission Opel Asconas than playing to the crowd. The drivers might not have worn fireproof overalls, but they were still trying very hard indeed. Everyone was sideways over the top of the Col de Turini, and the TV crews were there in force. But at the end of the night, Alpine Renaults took first, second and third places. Even though the Monte was won and lost on the snowy stages, there was still the hazard of the traffic on open roads, and it was easy to lose time. These Opel drivers looked rather relieved to drop down the mountain against the picturesque and quite unforgettable backdrop of Monte Carlo. This particular Monte in 1973 was honoured by being the first official World Championship rally, and the press were accordingly entertained. Future stars appeared on the readout, but the winner was Jean-Claude Androuet with his lady co-driver. Androuet just 26 seconds clear of teammate Ake Andersson's car, with Hannu Mikkola's Escort more than 2 minutes back in 4th place. An alternative form of top-class rallying could be found in Britain. The RAC Rally, a classic forestry special stage event. It all started gently enough from Harrogate, with plenty of variety in the field. Twice winner in 1969 and 1970, Harry Karlström's 1.6-litre Lancia Fulvia HF started first, closely followed by Stig Blomqvist in his Saab V4. And Bjorn Valdegaard in his Porsche 911S. With competition from 3 Works Escorts, there was a great battle in prospect. Ford's Bill Barnett, along with mechanics Mick Jones and Don Partington, had already planned ahead, but no one could have forecast the awful weather conditions to come. At Castle Howard in North Yorkshire, the tracks were icy, but there was still quite a lot of grip. The factory-prepared Escorts, car number 6 was Roger Clark's RS 1600, seemed to make heavy weather of it all. Four-wheel drive would certainly have been very useful in these conditions, but no one gave it a second thought. 2 reasons. One was that there was no compact four-wheel drive cars on the market, and the other was that such layouts were banned from rallying until 1979. One aspect of the RAC Rally, the spectator stages, generally considered to be the easiest of the special stages, but Peter Clark made Woburn appear very difficult. Hannu Mikkola's RS 1600 wisely decides to go the correct, the long way round. While Gunnar Blomqvist's Capri had its own ideas of the right way to get to the end of the stage. Co-driver Tony Mason still dines out on the incident. From the spectator stages to the forests of Britain, it's here that the RAC Rally has gained its reputation as the most grueling rally in the world. Local knowledge was essential as pace notes were forbidden, this being one of the world's few blind rallies. Here in Yorkshire, as ever, it was very slippery under the trees and some cars inevitably came to grief. Tony Fall, who became Opel's motorsport supremo later in the 70s, lost control of his big Datsun 240Z, and this was the result.
We were coming down this 8-mile stage and we had a puncture on the rear wheel. We weren't particularly worried about this. We had done half the distance and we thought we could get to the end of the stage without any problems. And we're descending a long hill to a very slight T-junction at the bottom, and unfortunately, with the flat tyre, the car didn't respond in the way I expected it.
The forests of Yorkshire having taken their toll, the rally moves to Scotland, where the snow closes in. The special stages hadn't been ploughed, and the rally cars weren't allowed to use studded tyres. It's a miracle, therefore, that cars like Trombotto's Fiat 124 Spider could keep going at all, though Roger Clark's Escort showed no signs of giving in to the weather. It wasn't long, though, before the rally ground to a halt, and Roger's comments tell their own story.
Good evening.
Good evening. How's it going?
Oh, not very well. We can't find any roads in the forest.
The prestige of winning the RAC, like the Monte Carlo, was of vital importance to works teams like Ford and Lancia. Budgets were increasing, and hence the pressure on drivers like Timo Mäkinen and Roger Clark was starting to show.
Roger and Jim came into the service point ahead of Timo, and they'd seen Timo stopped on the stage, and it appeared to them at the time that Timo was out of the rally. In fact, he wasn't. We stayed at the service point for about half an hour, three-quarters of an hour later, and Timo suddenly came screaming in.
The car's gone fabulously. Well, I'm a bit niggled is the sort of stupid false reporting that's been going on by BBC included.
What do you mean by that?
Today's papers said that we had smashed our gearbox to pieces, which is utter rot.
You had some damage to the gearbox, hadn't you?
None whatsoever. This is what annoys us. We stopped on a stage, yes, we had selector trouble. We just jammed the, well, you can't, I can't explain it very well. We jammed the gear lever really between second and third, and we couldn't get it out. That was all.
Service facilities and team communications were still very rudimentary. Timo Mäkinen eventually caught up with the news, getting together with Hannu Mikkola, Stuart Turner and Bill Barnett at a service, but none of them could catch the flying Blomqvist. Saab's front-wheel drive chassis was so well developed that Stig's didn't seem to be handicapped by its serious power disadvantage. The Swedish team's front-wheel drive car had the best traction and the best handling of all the cars in the event, and certainly one of the bravest of drivers. Stig's career was still blossoming, but he'd still be a winner nearly 2 decades later. Robin Richards saw the finish like this.
The first car clocked in here at exactly 6:30 on this cold but dry evening. For the 5th time in 10 years, victory has gone to a Swedish Saab, this time driven by Stig Blomqvist and Arne Hertz, both Swedes aged 25 years. Second place in this provisional order goes to another Swede, Bo Voldegard, in a Porsche, twice winner of the Monte Carlo Rally. Third is Carl Arrhenius, another Swede, in another Saab, followed by Hannu Mikkola and Gunnar Palm. Arrhenius moved up to third ahead of Mikkola in the last 100 miles. Timo Mäkinen of Finland, with Britain's Henry Lydon as his navigator, brought his Ford Escort into 5th place. The best placed British car looks like being the Ford Escort of Roger Clark and Jim Porter in 12th place.
Africa played host to a style of rallying in stark contrast to the high-speed events of Monte Carlo and the RAC. The East African Safari Rally, covering Kenya and Uganda, had no need for special stages. Difficult road conditions and the heat of Easter time were the elements that created this unique event. European drivers found it very difficult to adapt to the special demands of the event, and it wasn't until 1972 that a non-African driver first won the event. High performance, rugged construction and protection from dust were all essential to success. Where else in the world could you find sections like this? And where else could a Porsche 911 driver stay flat out in 5th gear for so long? Deep in the bush, though, cars often had to pick their way from hole to hole and ridge to ridge. It wasn't enough to rely upon outright horsepower if you were likely to break the car on boulders. This was where local knowledge was so important and why a detailed recce was vital. It also explains why old-fashioned Datsuns and steady but reliable Peugeots were still competitive. There was nothing ordinary and nothing conventional about the Safari. It was always hot, sometimes clouds of dust billowing around cars, sometimes sudden rain showers which turned the tracks into slippery quagmires. Local co-drivers could read the track conditions at a glance, and it was always better to be careful than fast and furious. Since its inception in 1953, there have been no less than 16 Kenyan winners. With no overall winner in 1958, it wasn't until 1966 and 67 that Shankland, in his Peugeot 404, interrupted the Kenyan domination. From time to time, the cars and the locals got together for a few minutes, especially when a ferry crossing was needed. Only one car at a time, mind you, and nothing more advanced than manual labour to drag the craft across the river. Work out for yourselves how long it takes to deal with an entire field. Minutes, not seconds, are lost on occasions like this. In 1972, though, the safari myth was broken when Finland's Hannu Mikkola and co-driver Gunnar Palm from Sweden became the first Europeans to win the event. So rallying took no single form in the early 1970s. Apart from the classic special stage events and the safari, there were marathons. Even back in '68, the first of these was the London to Sydney, crossing through Asia and the Australian deserts. The most famous of all, no question, was the Daily Mirror World Cup Rally of 1970, which took 5 weeks to reach Mexico City from London. Star drivers like Roger Clark, Timo Mäkinen, Rauno Aaltonen, Henry Lydon, Hannu Mikkola, and even football star Jimmy Greaves all battled through the mountains of Europe, the deserts of Patagonia, and the high peaks of Bolivia and Peru. Marathons like this attracted a great variety of cars. London to Mexico not only attracted familiar works machinery, but private owners who carried their spares on the roof. This BMC 1800 cameraman looked likely to lose his equipment on the next parapet. And the two complex Citroën DS19s stayed together for much of the way. Some, of course, entered just for fun, and what better way for the Martin family to aim for Mexico than by using an ancient Rolls-Royce. In the end, though, the experience of factory teams always won through. In Mexico City, after 16,000 miles, it would be a familiar scene. Wasting the champagne in the traditional manner on the roof of their car, but very welcome because of the heat of the day, were Hannu Mikkola and Gunnar Palm. Sometimes there were attempts to combine rallies with races, which explains the sight of James Hunt in a Vauxhall. And Jody Scheckter enjoying himself in a Ford Capri. Jerry Marshall on the same track as Roger Clark.
Could you describe your technique on a racetrack for us?
Not really. I shouldn't think anybody could.
This was the 1974 Tour of Britain, and Tony Fall was another big name to attempt this test of the all-round ability of car and driver. The event will be a combination of circuit racing, rally stages, and auto tests. No practice had been allowed, which meant that some drivers found the right way and some the wrong way to tackle the stages. Plenty of incident, but after 3 days, Roger Clark took the expected win.
Bloody good. He's a very fine fella. I'm most impressed playing all those racing drivers. Oh, that's not difficult. There you go. Well, shall I open it? It's the only pleasure I'm going to get out of this. Right, go on, fire it away. Good enough over, everybody. Hang on.
Only 2 factories threw great efforts behind rallying in the first few years of the decade. Lancia introduced the Fulvia Coupe in the mid-60s, and by 1970 it was a proven winner. The Fulvia HF had a 1.6-litre V4 engine and front-wheel drive. Add to this a 5-speed gearbox, aluminium body panels, top-grade drivers like Simo Lampinen, Harry Kallström, and Sandro Munari, the 1972 winner on Lancia's home ground, the San Remo, and the potential was obvious. The second factory, Alpine Renault, was completely different, run on Gallic flair and emotion. The ultralight rear-engine cars had been fragile in the 1960s, but Jean Rodellet's Dieppe-based team made steady refinement to the rear-wheel drive glass fibre bodywork machines. The Alpines were best of all where grip was low, which explains why they won so many loose surface or icy road events, but they were also very effective on tarmac. Their handling featured lots of tail-out oversteer, and drivers like Jean Venatier and Jean-Pierre Nicolas were real heroes. Ford specialised in the UK and Scandinavia. The Escorts were based at Boreham, and with many variations were competitive from 1968 right through the early 1980s. Although the Escorts looked to be conventional cars, they had front-mounted engines and beam rear axles. The RS 1600 type, which appeared in 1970, had a 16-valve twin-cam engine, was light and very powerful. The RAC Rally of 1972 emerged as a legend in rallying history. From 4 cars entered by Ford, only 1 remained at the end of the first night. Roger Clark, winner on the Welsh and the Jim Clark National Rally that year, had stormed into a lead which he held for 3 nail-biting days, finally reaching York to give the Ford Escort its first ever win on the RAC Rally. It was the first of a windfall of RAC victories, 8 consecutive wins for the Ford Escort RS. In the first few years of the 70s, Saab specialised mainly in Scandinavia and in the mud and rocks of Britain's forests. Stig Blomqvist, in addition to his RAC win in 1971, claimed the Thousand Lakes in Finland and a hat-trick of wins in Sweden. Saab, like Lancia, prepared cars with exceptional handling, but they were soft-sprung and short of power compared to their rivals. Inevitably, the Saab 96 V4 was nearing the end of its life as a serious international competitor. Similarly, Porsche was slowly fading from their former glory. Twice Monte Carlo winner in the 60s and in 1970, Porsche were unable to meet the challenge of the new generation of cars. Cars like the Lancia Stratus were waiting in the wings. Keeping in touch, Datsun's 240Z Sports Coupe, which made its name by winning the Safari Rally twice in 1971 and 1973. Drivers Hermann and Mehta. The new works team for the 1970s came from Fiat of Turin. The 124 Spider Abarth, developed from the 124 Sport Spider, attracted star drivers like Marco Allen and Hannu Mikkola. The Fiat team had become a serious long-term effort. The energy crisis of 1973-74 stopped rallying in its tracks for a time, but within a year, this car, the Lancia Stratus, had changed the face of the sport. The sensational Stratus was the world's first purpose-built rally car, and drivers such as Sandro Munari soon showed it was in a class of its own. World champions from 74 to 76, the Stratus was the car by which every team measured their standards. It was a stubby but beautiful machine which was equally at home on tarmac or on loose tracks. It was faster than all its rivals, had better traction, and it was extremely versatile. Its 4-cam Ferrari V6 engine was behind the seats, driving the rear wheels, and it had glass fibre bodywork. In Britain, the checkered flag Stratus of Olaf Wolfredson dominated the rally stages and dominated the starting ramps as well. There were no compromises with the amazing Stratus, which was just as much at home in the dust of a rough rally as on the tarmac stages of Europe. Just as happy to go very sideways when a corner loomed up as to be driven like a racing car on pace notes. the Stratus wasn't easy to drive. The tail-heavy machine, 3 times world champion, was unable to ever win the much sought-after RAC Rally. It was only changes of regulations and a change of company politics which finally killed it off. Fiat had bought Lancia in 1969, and it was inevitable that the separate works rally teams would combine one day. Both teams moved to Arbath in the mid-1970s, and the result was yet another world-beating homologation special from Turin, the 131 Arbath. By the mid-1970s, rallying was looking a lot more glossy and a lot more professional than ever before. Not only were the cars looking faster and more spectacular than ever, but new sponsors were queuing up to get their livery onto a winning car. Typical were the Allied Polymer Escorts, first driven by Timo Mäkinen and later by Ari Vatanen. Then, of course, there was the way that Roger Clark and his factory-backed Escort RS 1800 got together with Cossack Hairspray for 2 glorious years. In a succession of distinctively liveried bright red cars, Roger won event after event in the British Isles. And there's no doubt that the message got across to the public, especially after Roger was persuaded to make a TV commercial that linked his car with the product. Even Saab, that sober but business-like team, seemed to change their car colours every year, and they sold hundreds of extra rally jackets as a result. The new personalities and the new colours came thick and fast. One entertaining new character, Ari Vatanen, competing here on the British Championship of 1976. His exciting and aggressive style would be tamed in a few years, and obviously he was World Championship material. David Sutton built the best non-works escorts in the world, and he also had an eye for new talent. This was Pentti Riikola, 1976 Scottish Rally, the start of his long career. Then, of course, there was the start of the long partnership between Russell Brooks and Andrews Heat for Hire. Then, as later, Russell was determined to be a star, and the way he drove his cars surely proved it. Ari Vatanen emerged as British champion, yet victory was not always as clinical and efficient as he might have hoped.
They've got an axle in their car, so...
Yeah. What does it make?
Crown and pinion.
What's your problem?
Diff.
Oh.
Well, never broken. No one carries.
Was it broken on the stage?
Yes.
Did you stop in the stage?
No, we didn't stop still. We just came rolling down, and still we have same to us also.
Oh, well, you're okay.
Yeah, on that one, but we can't carry on, I mean.
Well, why can't you change it? I haven't got another one.
We haven't got any spare one.
Ah.
No one has, but that's right.
I see. Well, that's a simple answer.
It's a component which has never broken before in a British rally, so we don't carry them as spares. It's not a particularly common component. It's part out of a 3-litre Capri, part of the back axle, also part, obviously, of the BDA back axle. We can't find one at the moment, but we're still looking.
So what length will you go to get one?
Oh, we'll carry on looking as hard as we can, you know. We'll find a parked car and ask the owner if we can take his axle out of it and try that. We'll try anything.
Well, have a drove down the road in that Commodore so you can see somebody with a 3-litre Capri then. Yeah, that's the best bet.
What's this version? That is a 3-litre.
Yes, it is 3-litre.
So the only way to find a spare was to stop a passing spectator.
We have a technical problem. We want a 3-litre Capri diff.
You were first 3 liter Capri. We have tried everything, helicopter and everything. Ready to go. Can I start?
Yes.
The best thing I think to do is to get it hooked into the dealer down the road and get them to put either a new axle in complete or a new crown wheel and pinion, and just send the bill to me. I'll give you my card.
The combination of a production back axle and rally gearing will produce some rather interesting acceleration characteristics. The mid-1970s, though, was a time when the cars were very exciting to watch, when the competition was intense and when the spectators clearly loved the action. Was it a golden age? It seemed so at the time, for rally cars were still quite cheap, the weather usually seemed to be glorious, and there was plenty of glamour to be found on the fast and flowing stages. (1976) and Roger Clark is on the way to winning his second RAC. In 1977 and 1978, the World Rally Championship came of age, with Fiat and Ford battling it out for victory. This was the time when Lancia Stratos had been retired, when it was still an outright winner all round the world. Teams like Saab, always crowd pleasers, were left really gasping by the pace, but their turbocharged car was on the way. Ford and Fiat teams were evenly matched. The Ford Escort RS 1800s were certainly fastest, but simple, while Fiat's 131R Baths were beautifully prepared and technically advanced. Ford drivers like Bjorn Valdegard and Hannu Mikkola were already superstars, but Fiat matched this with Marco Alén, a rising star in his own right. And they matched it also with extravagant budgets and with entries in events all round the world. There was an element of horses for courses in this battle, for while Ford were supreme on loose surfaces, Fiat were usually victorious on tarmac. Usually it went according to the book, but sometimes there were surprises, as for instance when Kyösti Hämäläinen won the Thousand Lakes for Ford in 1977. In 77, together with Bjorn Valdegard, Ford's major effort was made in the Safari Rally. Fiat didn't enter, so 4 Escorts started a hot and dusty event, knowing that their main rivals were Mitsubishi and Peugeot. There was high-speed action right from the start, but heavy rain in mid-event turned the whole Safari into a mud bath. When faced with conditions like this, teams had to forget about high speed and settle for survival instead. In those days, Safari technology was more about waterproofing than about pace notes and tyre pressures. There's nothing quite as slippery as Kenyan mud, as Jean-Pierre Nicolas' Peugeot demonstrates at this control. Co-driver Jean Todt looks distinctly unhappy. It's all a far cry from the glory days as Peugeot's motorsport director, which would follow a few years later. In the end, though, the effort was worthwhile, for Bjorn Valdegard won the wettest Safari on record. By the end of the year, Fiat had won the championship, though Ford had won events, and Bjorn Valdegaard had become the season's star performer. Driving a brand new car supported by British Airways sponsorship, he dominated the Lombard RAC Rally from beginning to end, whether it was on the twisty tarmac of sections like the Great Orme or on the long, flowing and slippery forest stages of central Wales. Valdegaard, like other great drivers of this period, enjoyed pushing the nimble Escort to its limits. It was a sort of car that seemed to enjoy going sideways, in perfect control. Roger Clark once said that as long as he wasn't watching the road out of the back window, he knew everything would be okay. It was a rugged machine which could deal with all types of rough going, and one which barked its way to hundreds of victories. Victories for Ford on the Safari, Acropolis, Thousand Lakes and the RAC were not enough to prevent Fiat from snatching the World Championship. Fiat's 5 wins had come from 5 different drivers: Allen, Bacelli, Salonen, Androuet and Darniche, which showed the versatility of the team compared to the virtual one-man show of Ford. With the Lancia Stratos now retired, Fiat won the World Championship again in 1978. The team refined the design of the 131 Abarth, making it suitable for tarmac and loose surface going, and they put a huge effort behind its drivers. It was well balanced, strong, a good high jumper on fast stages, and it could rapidly be adjusted to all sorts of conditions. Success was largely due to Marco Allen's brilliance. Marco, a Finn, had joined the Italian team in 1975 when the team was using 124 Abarth Spiders, but he soon settled in and took to the 131 Abarth saloon like a duck to water. Fiat was inventive and was always pushing to improve its cars. How about this novel little tweak to help the traction? For the Lombard RAC Rally of 1978, Fiat modified Walter Rawls' car by putting the co-driver's seat in the middle of the rear compartment. That was a change outlawed after only one rally, but full marks to Fiat for trying. For the same rally, Marco Allen persuaded Lancia to bring a Stratos out of retirement. Marco tried his best, but the transmission eventually broke, and this car, Hannu Mikkola's Eaton Yale-sponsored Escort RS, won the rally instead. It was another example of Ford's versatility. A strike at the factory meant that works cars couldn't be entered, so the team drivers were lent out to private teams. Mikkola drove for David Sutton. The car was as good as anything that Borum could provide, and you can see how delighted Hannu and Arnie Hertz were by the result. Roger Clark's RAC rally had gone disastrously wrong. His British supremacy under threat by younger drivers. Trying too hard, he left the road in dramatic style.
We had a clutch break going through one of the stages, and we were driving without a clutch. And we came to a rather tricky corner and misjudged it and went off. But the problem, we got the car sorted out, and we tried to start, and we had no clutch, and we had no starter motor either, so we couldn't move the car.
By this time, too, there was a new shape in European rallying, the Vauxhall Chevette HS. Dealer team Vauxhall, determined to beat Ford in motorsport, had inspired the birth of the 16-valve twin-cam engine Chevette and had hired Blydenstein Racing to develop it for rallying. Operating from Shepworth near Cambridge, the team made the small and nimble hatchback into a formidable rally car, with Finland's Pentti Riikola carrying out much of the testing. The new Chevette became a Group 4 car in November 1976, but less than a year after its launch, it had won its first international rally. It was competitive right from the start, and this famous sequence shows how much Pentti impressed the BBC's Harry Carpenter.
Quite a few moments already, when I thought my last moments might have been just around the corner. Seems to me that Pentti is at times going stark staring mad because he's driving around this circuit at speeds which I would consider to be almost suicidal under good conditions. But in fact, he's taking this car around this extraordinary mud-rutted, frozen surface at the most extraordinary speeds, and at times it really is, to me anyway, terrifying. Because you go into bends at speeds where I would think the car is bound to come off the road. Sometimes we hit dips. If I weren't strapped in, I'd be through the roof. I mean, the conditions really are, in my opinion, totally treacherous. And how anybody can throw a car round it, revving all the time, accelerating all the time. I keep thinking, oh, I thought we were going to hit that tree on the left. It really is unbelievable the speeds at which you seem to throw this thing into the corners. I might as well tell you that I'm scared stiff.
Finland, the Thousand Lakes Rally, home of the Flying Finns, but for Pentti and the new Vauxhall team, a disappointing result. Early mechanical failure prevented the hoped-for impact on the World Rally scene, and the disappointment showed on Pentti's face.
How much time have you got to spare here, Pentti?
No, nothing. No, sorry.
You told me how long? 3 minutes now.
The RAC British Rally Championships always generated immense competition. Pentti and his Vauxhall Chevette and Russell Brooks's Ford Escort had a year-long battle, a battle which helped set the pattern for a famous rivalry that continued through the 80s. In 1978, Brooks's Escort seemed to have the measure of the Vauxhall at first, but only seconds ever separated the cars.
I think the cars are fairly evenly matched. I think the Vauxhall actually had the legs on the Escort in terms of speed at the beginning of the year, but not reliability. But if anything, we've caught up a little bit in speed, and the Vauxhall, of course, has got more reliable, so it makes it a very, very tense situation.
Too fast. It's very good. I think a driver should at least twice a year to roll. It's only sign that he's trying hard enough to.
I don't entirely share Pentti's sentiments, but he was right about one thing. We were certainly trying hard, all right.
Russell Brooks rolling in the Welsh forests. Pentti had his moments too.
Can you tell us what happened here, Pentti?
Oh, I think you can see it. But we just tried too fast. She went very sideways, and we were so small ditch. It took the car and it rolled.
that up tight.
Have you completed your stages yet, Russell? Or have you come in between them?
No, we've come in between them because we broke a rear shock absorber and we've also had some more brake trouble. So we cut out in the middle of them to try and get them fixed. This is not our rally.
Penty's Vauxhall won the first round of the Open Series Championship in 1978 and Russell the second, but Hannu Mikkola then won 3 further events and clinched the championship at the end of the year. Escorts seemed to come in all colours. Ari Vatanen had a car sponsored by Gandhi brake linings. While this was the first time that British fans saw an Escort sponsored by Eaton's Yale. Hannu Mikkola, 1978 British champion. British Leyland, which had been out of rallying for some years, came back in the mid-70s, but had to wait 2 or 3 years before their cars could match the pace of the established opposition. Although the Triumph Dolomite Sprint didn't look as extrovert as the Fords and Vauxhalls with which it had to compete, it was a rugged and reliable machine. But managed by John Davenport, the team then started using a new sports car, the TR7, in 1976. Once it got a light alloy V8 engine in '78 and was renamed the TR7 V8, it was possibly the fastest British rally car of all. With Tony Pond as the team star driver, the TR7 V8 was at its best on tarmac. It squatted low, had excellent traction, and it looked, sounded, and was an impressive sight. Although unsuccessful in forestry stage events, TR7 V8s won major events on tarmac in Britain and in Europe. It was only sheer bad luck which stopped the team in its tracks on World Championship rallies like the Tour de Corse.
Hello, my friend.
So who were the other major players? Tony Fall founded the British dealer Opel team in 1974 and not only managed but drove his new cars. At first the Asconas were too heavy and underpowered, but with Brian Culcheth driving, the Cadet GTE was a very successful Group 1 car. It wasn't long before Tony moved to West Germany to run Opel's European motorsport programs. His first task was to turn the promising Cadet GTE into a pace-setter all over Europe. But for the 1980s, he had ambitious plans for the 16-valve Asconas and Mantas. By the mid-1970s, Datsun had stopped using its 240Z coupes in favour of the smaller but noisy, tough and fast 4-cylinder Violet saloons. Andy Dawson moved over from driving an Escort to build these cars for the Japanese concern. And by the end of the decade, the cars were as reliable as any other rally car, though not quite as fast as the Fiats or the Fords. Ove Anderson's Toyota team was still based in Belgium. He chose to use Celica coupes and concentrated his efforts on off-road events. They were always beautifully prepared, and when they were driven by heroes like Hannu Mikkola, they were always competitive. Saab abandoned its V4s in the 1970s and then concentrated on the larger 99 models. Still with front-wheel drive, the turbocharged version was ready by 1978 when stars like Stig Blomqvist and Per Eklund made it go improbably fast. Rallying, in fact, had become a highly professional business, but not everything was going according to plan.
Yes, well, the car's quick. If I can learn how to drive it, we'll be all right.
For the spectators, there was a great deal of variety, as these 1979 Mintex rally scenes emphasise. Saab's 99 Turbo was solid, stable and easily controllable, though it was really too heavy to beat the Fiats and Fords on tarmac. British Leyland's TR7 V8 was aggressively styled, but not always successful. A promising new driver, Malcolm Wilson, attracted sponsorship for his Ford Escort and immediately started setting fast times. But no matter who the driver, no excuse was needed to spray the victory champagne. Blomqvist won round one of the British Championship, but Penty would go on to win in the forests of Wales and Scotland to finally become British Open Rally Champion 1979. In less than a decade, it seems, rallying had changed from a fun sport to a very professional business. Teams like DTV spent hour upon hour testing their cars, matching engine and suspension settings to tarmac and loose surface conditions. It was time to try one type of tyre against another, time to work on the promotional material, and time to go fast just for the hell of it. Practice, they say, makes perfect, and all the top teams did a lot of that. Penty Auricula then, British champion that year, the year that the first Drivers' World Championship was instituted, replacing the short-lived FIA Cup. So who would become the first ever world champion? Well, Penty had the qualifications. Hannu Mikkola, winner of the Thousand Lakes in 1968, won the World Cup in 1970, the Safari in 1972, and 2 Lombard RAC rallies at the end of the decade. Bjorn Valdegaard won 2 Montes for Porsche, won 3 World Championship rallies in Lancias, and then joined Ford to become their most successful driver in 1977. Roger Clark was Britain's best ever rally driver, winning countless events in Ford Escorts, most notably the RAC rallies of 1972 and 1976. Ari Vatanen exploded on the scene in 1975, won the British Open Series in 1976 and joined the World Championship scene a year later. First with Ford, then with Peugeot, he became a great crowd pleaser. Walter Röhrl, the German, drove for Opel before joining Fiat in 1978. In the next few years, he'd win the World Drivers' Championship twice and the Monte Carlo Rally 4 times. Marco Allen drove for Ford in 1974, but joined Fiat Lancia in 1975. Marco usually drove the 131R Bath, but loved rallying the Lancia Stratus. He won the FIA Cup, the unofficial World Championship, in 1978. And Stig Blomqvist's works career, that began in 1971, the year in which he won the RAC Rally, and he drove for Saab through the 70s. He went on to become world champion in 1984. Jean-Claude Androuet started the 70s as an Alpine Renault works driver, winning the Monte in 71 and 73. Later, he joined Fiat and won the San Remo Rally in 77. Sandro Munari was Lancia's star driver in the 70s. He won the Monte Carlo Rally 4 times, 3 of them in a Stratus, and used a Stratus to win no fewer than 4 other World Championship events. Shekhar Mehta was a safari specialist who excelled at other long-distance rough road events. He won the Safari in 73, then 4 more times in succession, 79 to 82 inclusive, every time in a Datsun product. By 1979, Timo Salonen of Finland was a rising star. Having won 1 World Championship rally for Fiat in 77, he joined Datsun for 1979. He would become world champion with Peugeot in 1985. The first official World Rally Championship was held in 1979, and throughout the year, Lancia, Ford, Fiat and Datsun slugged it out, round after round. Bernard Darniche's privately entered Stratos was supreme on the last night of the Monte Carlo in front of the TV cameras and thousands of spectators. And victory went to the blue Lancia by a mere 6 seconds. Bjorn Valdegaard had led for 29 out of the 30 stages, but after Bjorn had to stop his car to move boulders which had been placed in the road to stop him, the victory slipped away to Lancia. Ford then took second place in Sweden and a 1-2 in Portugal, and then after missing the Safari, won by Sheikha Mehta's Datsun, the Rothmans-sponsored team turned out in force on the Acropolis. For 4 hot days and nights, it was to be another head-to-head battle between the Escort and Darniche's Stratos. There was so much dust that visibility was always a big problem, and the drivers always looked to be under strain. Although Hannu Mikkola had a brand new car for the event, his engine let go after 9 stages, while Roger Clark's car failed a few hours later. After that, there was no time to stand and stare at that wonderful Greek scenery, though by tradition, the rally started under the shadow of the Parthenon itself, in the city of Athens. Before the off, Bjorn Valdegaard was a little apprehensive about the tight schedule.
Bjorn, you out to repeat your success of 2 years ago?
I should like to, but it's a big competition actually, and the timing is very tight on the road sections this year, so we have just to keep the fingers crossed that we don't get into some trouble, you know, then we lose time.
It's much tighter than it was when you were here last, is it?
Very tough. I feel it is a bit too tough. We have to go flat out even through villages.
Although the Escort led right from the start, the gallant Stratos was never far behind. Steady and patient development had made both cars very strong and very fast, whether it was in the choking dust of the countryside or on the incredibly slippery tarmac of the Greek country roads. Drivers talk about getting a car dancing, and this shows just what they mean by that. The cars are never straight for more than a second or two, but they're always under complete control. The Stratos had started slowly but rapidly caught up. After the halfway halt, it began to catch the Ford, but as a private entry fighting a factory team, it was always in trouble. The car clearly carrying some scars. The Stratos sporting a damaged left side and isn't looking as healthy as at the start of the rally. The rough roads of Greece certainly took their toll as both cars repeatedly suffered from concussion punctures. On the last day, the Escort lost its complete exhaust system, which might have cost it the rally.
Can you put on, do you have any exhaust with you? Exhaust?
Yes. Yeah. Can do it in 15 minutes.
I'll have a look. Check it out. Come on.
I can put one on, but they won't stay on, that's the problem.
Not at all.
Well, I'll try and wire it on.
Can I weld it on?
Huh? I'll finish these tyres off, Gordon, yourself.
Yeah, where's the centre part?
Very hard night. Very big fight with Danish. You know, I lost time when I had 2 punctures on one stage, and we was equal. And we was really, really fighting until he broke his rear suspension.
But after all that, the Lancia's suspension collapsed for the second time, and it was a very tired Valdegaard who was able to celebrate victory on the ramp in Athens. It had taken 13.5 hours of stages to get this far. Ford won in New Zealand, Fiat in the Thousand Lakes, and Valdegaard won again for Ford in Canada before the action returned to mainland Europe. Ford had never planned to face Fiat and Lancia on their home ground, the San Remo rally, and one can see why. Some of the rally stages were over dust-clogged tracks, but most were on tarmac. So it was here that Tony Facina's privately financed Jolly Club Lancia Stratus proved to be ideal. This victory, in fact, was a real embarrassment to Fiat, whose 4 131R Baths were well beaten. Company politics had seen the unique Stratus prematurely retired at the end of 1977, so that ordinary-looking Fiats could take the limelight. Not much limelight here, but since there was a local boy making good, it was still good news in Italy. The climax of the rallying year came in Britain in November, when 175 cars started the Lombard RAC rally from Chester. Ford had already clinched the World Championship for makes and were about to retire from rallying to develop a new car, but they were still determined to go out with a flourish. No fewer than 7 Works Escorts lined up against Marco Ellen's Stratus, Walter Rawls' Fiat 131R Bath, Stig Blomqvist's Saab 99 Turbo, and a host of other stars. Even on the first special stage in Knowsley Park near Liverpool, the pace was fast and furious. The overhead camera catches Hannu Mikkola sampling the grass on one of the first corners, and almost every other driver was proving just how slippery the stage actually was. A new combination, Tony Pond and the Talbot Sunbeam Lotus. Toyota's cars were set up to go three-wheeling on the tarmac stages, but at least they appeared to be in full control. That's more than you can say for Shigeo Kaneko's Mazda RX-7. Or for Sahiro Fukuda's Datsun Sunny. They should have watched and learned from Marco Ellen controlling the Stratus or Pentti Ricola, the Chevette. But there were others who'd never learn. Throughout the season, Datsun's single-cam saloons had been consistent but never quite fast enough to beat the European cars. In the Lombard RAC Rally, Timo Salonen's 160J and Andy Dawson's sister car went well, while dozens fell out around them. And at half distance, Salonen's car was up to 7th. Even though many were rooting for Ford to win, the crowd's favourite seemed to be Marco Ellen's Lancia Stratus. This old car led the rally for 10 stages, then went off the road for 14 minutes in Kielder and never recovered from that. Marco was 10th at half distance, but still trying hard. Much of the Lombard RAC Rally runs through the night, usually with fog, often with ice, and the problems intensify. Although Ford's works escorts were in the lead, the team still had problems.
All luck I had earlier this year, I think I lost it all this night. But that's the game.
What went wrong? What's gone wrong?
We got a puncture on one long stage before Kielder. And when we should jack it up, the jack broke down. And it took us a bit more than 6 minutes to get it going again.
Yeah, there's, Hannu is on its own and the rest is then comes behind.
So you're in second place, though?
Yes, but the gap is very big. So, Mr. Mikkola is fantastic.
The Lake District stages were as spectacular as ever, but rally leader Hannu Mikkola had no time to admire the view. His car led with amazing reliability, though other escorts were having a hard time. Russell Brooks, third in 1978, was trying even harder this year. Third at the night halt behind Mikkola and Vatanen, he attacked the tarmac of the Great Orme stage as if his career depended on it. Timo Salonen started the second half of the event at top speed, refusing to let a 70 horsepower power disadvantage get in his way. He was fast, if untidy, on Great Orme and at Weston Park. As the rally moved into the last night, this sort of pressure was about to hit Tony Pond's Sunbeam Lotus, which crashed, and Roger Clark's Escort, which blew its engine. After 59 grueling stages, Ford's drivers triumphed in their last event as a team. 4 drivers finished in the top 6, and only Marco Ellen's Stratus and Salonen's remarkable Datsun could get among them. For Hannu Mikkola, it was his second successive Lombard RAC success, while for Peter Ashcroft, it was the end of an era.
Well, yeah, I'll be sad to see the team, as it is, break up, Bjorn go to somebody else, and the drivers disappear to drive for other manufacturers, obviously. But, I mean, we've got to do development for a new vehicle, and regulations change in '82, so I think it's the right thing to do is stop when we're winning.
Although Valdegaard only managed to finish 9th, it still helped his championship hopes, and these were confirmed 3 weeks later, when Valdegaard was victorious over his close rival Mikkola, both driving Mercedes, on the Bandama. At the end of the year, indeed at the end of the decade, he became rallying's first official world champion. The '80s would take the sport another great leap forward.